Hello students, my name is Niyati Said and thanks for watching Edupedia word videos. My topic for the presentation is the next section of the chapter Neural Control and Coordination. In this section of presentation, we'll be studying about the brain and the three divisions of brain. Okay, so brain, it is the most complex part of the human body. It is a 3-pound organ and it is a seat of intelligence. It can interpret, so that's why it is an interpreter of the senses. It is an initiator of body movements and the controller of behavior. You can say it is a boss of the body, okay, that controls everything. Lying in its bony shell and washed by protective fluid, that is cerebrospinal fluid, the brain is the source of all qualities that define our humanity. Brain is the crown jewel of the human body. Brain lies within the skull and is shaped like a mushroom, or you can say a walnut. A brain consists of 4 principal parts, and which are those? Brain stem, cerebrum, cerebellum and diencephalon. So let's proceed towards our divisions. But before proceeding it, I would like to tell you that the human brain, it weighs approximately about 1.3 to 1.4 kg. And it has nerve cells called the neurons and the supporting cells called as glia. These are typical neuron structures, and this is glial cell that support these neuron cells. So both neuron and glial cells, they integrate neural output and they release transmitters. They have a long range signaling and can enwrap synaptic terminals and are connected by gap junctions, which I have already taught you in my previous section of the presentation. This is the typical neuron structure, which has cell body, dendrites. These small projections are dendrites, and this projection is known as axon, which I have already taught you in detail in my previous sections of the presentation, so please refer to those presentations also. Neurons, they receive stimulation from their branches known as dendrites, and they communicate with other neurons that create a network with millions of other by firing a nerve impulse along the axon. Okay, and these are the glial cells that support these neuron cells. So glial cells, they carry nutrients, they carry speed, they have the repair mechanism. Okay, and they provide myelin for axons. These are the axons. Okay, and these glial cells, they provide myelin to the axon. Okay, that means it makes the neuron myelinated and may form their own communication network. They are also involved in neurogenesis. Neurogenesis means neuron formation. Okay. Now, there are 2 types of matter in the brain. Okay, the brain, you can say that brain has millions of neurons or the nerve cells, which are packed together by the connective tissues or cells. They are called as neuroglial, which I have already taught you. Okay, and each neuron has a cell body called cyton and nerve fibers such as axon and dendrons. Hence, the brain is made up of 2 substances, and which are those? Gray matter and white matter. Gray matter, it receives, it stores impulses, okay, or you can say it forms the outer layer of the brain, and it is made up of cell bodies or cytons of the neurons. Okay, so cell bodies of neurons and neuroglia are in the gray matter. Okay. Gray matter, you can say that it forms the outer layer of the brain. Okay. And now comes white matter. White matter in the brain carries impulses to and from gray matter. That means white matter is a link, is a connective link that takes impulses to and from gray matter, and it consists of nerve fibers, that is axons. And it is, you can say that white matter is present in the center of the brain, and it is made up of myelinated nerve fibers of the neuron. Okay. Now we'll see the 4 divisions of brain. First is the brain stem. Okay, so brain stem is also known as medulla oblongata. This one is the medulla oblongata. Okay, and it is located between pons and the spinal cord, and it is about 1 inch long. Okay, this is somewhere pons and this is the spinal cord, so it is between pons and the spinal cord, and it is about 1 inch long. Okay. Now comes your cerebrum, which is the second part. Cerebrum, it forms the bulk of the brain and is supported on the brain stem. Okay, see, this is brain stem. Okay, and this is entire cerebrum, which forms the bulk of the brain. And the cerebrum is divided into 2 hemispheres, left hemisphere and right hemisphere, and each hemisphere, it controls the activity and the side of the body opposite that hemisphere. That means the left hemisphere of the brain, it controls the right part of the entire body, whereas your left hemisphere, it controls the right part of the body, and the right hemisphere of the brain, it controls the left part of the body. That means each hemisphere controls the activity of the side of the body opposite that hemisphere. Okay, and now these hemispheres, they are further divided into 4 lobes, which are those frontal lobes, temporal lobes, parietal lobe, and occipital lobe. See, this is parietal lobe, this is occipital lobe, okay, this is temporal lobe, and this is frontal lobe. Okay, now this is frontal lobe, so it has motor areas. Okay, it has, you can say that this frontal lobe, it has motor areas on precentral gyrus for the movement of voluntary muscles. For example, leg muscles, arm muscles, neck muscles, face muscles, eye muscles, and tongue muscles. Okay. It also, this frontal lobe, it also has association areas which carry out intellectual processes as those required for concentration, planning, complex problem solving, and judging the consequences of behavior. Okay. This frontal lobe, it has a Broca's area. Broca's area is also known as speech area, which translates thoughts into speech, and it controls movement of tongue, lips, and vocal cord. So I hope it is clear to all of you now. Frontal lobe. Now let's proceed towards our parietal lobe. This yellow part is our parietal lobe. Parietal lobe, it has sensory areas, okay, that called as somasthetic areas for the sensation of heat, cold, pain, pressure, touch, and light. It has association areas which is concerned with the understanding the speech and in using words to express thoughts and feelings. Now comes your occipital lobe, this green part. Occipital lobe, it has visual area for sight or vision. It has association areas concerned with perception, analysis, and storing information which is obtained by sight. That means which is obtained by our eyes. Okay. Now comes temporal lobe, this pink part. This temporal lobe, it has acoustic area for hearing. Okay. And it also for taste and smell. It has association areas which is concerned with the interpretation of sensory experiences. memory of visual scenes, music, etc. Okay, so I hope these 4 lobes of cerebrum is clear to all of you now. That is frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe and temporal lobe. Now moving on to the third part of our brain, that is cerebellum. Cerebellum, it is located behind and below your cerebrum, which is the second part of the brain which we just studied. Okay, so cerebellum, it is the second largest part of the brain, which comprise 11% of the weight of the brain. Okay, and it is just located below the posterior part of the cerebrum, between occipital lobe and medulla oblongata. These are the 4 hemispheres of the cerebrum: parietal, frontal, temporal and occipital, and this is cerebellum. So it is present at the posterior part of the occipital lobe. This is the, suppose this is the occipital lobe, so this cerebellum, which is the third largest, the third part of our brain, it is present posterior to the occipital lobe. Okay, and this cerebellum is made up of gray matter and it has many folds. Okay, the deeper part of cerebellum is called as cerebellar medulla and is made up of white matter. Okay, and please note that the function of this cerebellum is to control and coordinate contraction of skeletal muscles, especially during walking and running. And another function of cerebellum is to maintain body posture and body equilibrium. And third function is to receive input from cerebrum, brain stem and internal ear. Okay, so this was all about cerebellum. Okay, and it also receives sensory inputs from eyes, muscle joints and semicircular canals of the internal ear. Okay, please note that. So these were the functions of the cerebellum. Now comes diencephalon. What does diencephalon do? Diencephalon is also known as the forebrain stem. Okay, it is also known as forebrain stem. It includes thalamus and hypothalamus. See, and thalamus is again divided into 2, right thalamus and left thalamus. And the thalamus is where sensory and other impulses go and coalesce, or means joins. Okay, and the hypothalamus, it is the smallest part of the diencephalon. So diencephalon, you can say that it is made up of right thalamus, left thalamus and hypothalamus. Okay, so this is your diencephalon. Diencephalon is a you can say that it is also known as forebrain stem. Okay, so this was all about your the diencephalon. Okay, now architecture of brain will be studying in detail. That brain is like the committee of experts, okay, that work in conjugation with each other. The brain is like the committee of experts. All parts of the brain, they work together, but each part has its own special properties. And which are those? They can be divided into 3 basic units: forebrain, midbrain and your hindbrain. Okay, so this is the system how the brain is divided, or this is the architecture of the brain. The brain is divided into 3: forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Forebrain consists of thalamus, hypothalamus, limbic system and cerebrum. Okay, and midbrain, it is not divided in further, But hindbrain, it is divided into three parts: medulla, pons and cerebellum. Okay. Cerebrum of the forebrain, it is divided into two hemispheres, left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Left hemisphere, it is again divided into four parts, which we have already studied: occipital lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe and frontal lobe. And whereas right hemisphere, it is divided into frontal lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobe and occipital lobe. Okay, same as that of the left hemisphere. And limbic system of the forebrain is again divided into three: septum, amygdala and hippocampus. Okay. Now let's study forebrain first. Forebrain is the most anterior division of the developing vertebrae. Okay. Vertebrate brain that contains the most complex network in the central nervous system. Forebrain is considered as the highest region of the brain because it essentially differentiates us human from the rest in the animal kingdom. This region is involved in processing complex informations. The forebrain, as I have told you, it is composed of limbic system, thalamus, hypothalamus and cerebral cortex. Okay. So forebrain, it has two major divisions: diencephalon and telencephalon. Okay. The diencephalon is lower. This diencephalon, it is lower and it contains the thalamus and hypothalamus, which together form the limbic system. And the telencephalon is on the top of the diencephalon. Okay, that means this is the thalamus and this is the hypothalamus. So together it is making diencephalon. Okay, which together forms the limbic system. That means thalamus plus hypothalamus is known as limbic system. And the telencephalon is on the top of the diencephalon. These two. It is on the top of these two and it contains cerebrum. Okay, this is your cerebrum, which is the home of the highest level cognitive processing in the brain. Okay. And it is the largest and the complicated forebrain that distinguishes the human brain from other vertebrate brains. Now, what does thalamus do? Thalamus, as you can see, this is the thalamus. It sits on the top of the brain stem. This is the brain stem. Okay, and it sits on the top of the brain stem. It sorts and relays incoming information to the different parts of the forebrain. For example, information coming from the cerebellum is oftentimes relayed to the motor cortex in the cerebral cortex. The thalamus, it also works with the reticular formation on regulating states of sleep and wakefulness. Okay. And what does this hypothalamus do? Hypothalamus is located just below the thalamus. This is your hypothalamus. And that's the reason its name is hypothalamus, because it is located just below the thalamus, so it is hypothalamus. It monitors pleasurable activities such as eating, drinking and sex. It influences endocrine system, particularly the pituitary gland, in secreting hormones in response to different emotions, stress and rewarding feelings. Okay. And these hypothalamus and thalamus, they together form a limbic system. Okay. But in few books it is written that limbic system is made up of amygdala and hippocampus. Okay. So don't get confused with it. Okay. Now comes your this is the diagram of forebrain. Forebrain is also known as prosencephalon, and midbrain is also known as mesencephalon, and hindbrain is known as rhombencephalon. Okay, so this green part is your rhombencephalon, this is your midbrain, that is mesencephalon, and this is your prosencephalon, that is your forebrain. Okay, and this is your spinal cord. Now comes your midbrain. Midbrain makes up the part of the brain stem. Midbrain, it serves to relay information between hindbrain and forebrain, and particularly information coming from eyes and ears. It is composed of two systems. First is your reticular formation and a cluster of neurons having dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine receptors. Now, when I say that midbrain has systems such as reticular formation, then what do you mean by reticular formation? Reticular formation is involved with the stereotypical pattern of behavior such as walking, sleeping, and other reflexes. Parkinson's disease, which is a neurodegenerative disease in which neurons starts to get degenerate, it causes involuntary tremors on the affected body parts, and it damages a section near the bottom of the midbrain. Okay, so please note that if a person is affected from a Parkinson's disease, then in that disease it damages a section near the bottom of the midbrain. Okay, and if we talk about the location of the midbrain, then it is located between hindbrain and forebrain. Okay, all sensory and the motor information, it travels between the forebrain and the spinal cord. It passes through the midbrain and making it to relay station for the central nervous system. See, this is our forebrain, which is made up of telencephalon and diencephalon together forms the forebrain, and this is our mesencephalon, that is our midbrain. This is pons and cerebellum, that forms metencephalon, and this is the melencephalon, which is known as medulla oblongata. These together they form a hindbrain. Okay, and this is our spinal cord. So all sensory and motor information that travels between the forebrain and the spinal cord passes through the midbrain, and it makes a relay station for the central nervous system. Now comes hindbrain. Hindbrain, it is a well protected central core of the brain. Okay, hindbrain, it is located at the rear of the skull and is the lowest portion of the brain. Hindbrain part includes medulla, cerebellum, and pons. This is our cerebellum, this is our pons, and this is our medulla oblongata. Okay, the medulla is where this is the medulla. Medulla is where the spinal cord enters the skull. As you can see, this is the spinal cord through which it enters the skull. This part is known as medulla, and it is responsible for controlling breathing, regulating reflexes, and maintaining the upright posture of the body. Okay, now comes your cerebellum. This is the cerebellum. It has two rounded structure which is located beside the medulla, and cerebellum, as you can see, that it is responsible for coordinating motor activities such as movement of the body, so that extensive damage of the cerebellum can cause failure to even stand up also. Okay, now the third part of the hindbrain is your pons. Pons, it serves as a bridge towards the midbrain. As you can see, this is the midbrain. Okay, and this is a connecting link between, you can say that it is a bridge towards the midbrain, and it is a cluster of neuronal fiber that surrounds the reticular formation. And this pons is responsible for monitoring sleep and arousal by coordinating with autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system I have already taught you in my previous section of the presentation. Okay, so these are the parts of the hindbrain, that it includes cerebellum, reticular formation, brain stem, which are responsible for some of the basic autonomic functions of life such as breathing and movement. And brain stem contains the pons and the medulla oblongata, which is a part of the hindbrain. Okay, and evolutionary speaking, if we talk evolutionary, then the hindbrain, it contains the oldest parts of the brain, which all vertebrates possess, though they may look different from the species to species. So this was all about the architecture of the brain and the 3 divisions of the brain. So stay tuned and keep watching Edupedia word videos.